I got this question about working more on Alexandra, but I also got a question from Maduna Shortbase, who asked specifically about the word throb. What does it suggest about Alexandra? And explain the paradox. So I'm going to combine these two. So the person who sent me that and this one. So start with, what does throb mean? You know that throb is the beating of the heart, the pulse of the heart. So he's talking to whom? Talking to Alexandra, to the township, says, my beginning was knotted to you, that's Alexandra. You throb in my inside silences. So the township is like a heartbeat inside him. So it's just, what does the word throb suggest? The heartbeat, and therefore life itself. Because if the heart stops beating, you die. So Alexandra is life. It's the source of life to the speaker. It's where he was created and he still exists because of the township. Then we've got the paradox. So somebody else, somewhere or other, asked about a paradox. So let's just deal with paradox here. It is an apparent contradiction. So it looks like something that doesn't make any sense, but when you think about it, it's only apparently nonsense. It actually does make sense. It does have sense. So if we come back to our poem, you are silent in my heartbeat that's loud to me. You throb in my inside silences. So if we have a heart throbbing, presumably it can be heard. You can hear a heartbeat. So we've got the idea of a sound and the idea of silence. So you are silent, the township is silent in the heartbeat, but he can hear the heartbeat. There is the paradox, the apparent contradiction. How can you hear something that is loud when that thing is silent? So, what is he saying? He's saying that normally you can hear the heart beating. You can hear the heartbeat. And in that heartbeat, he hears the township. So the township does not speak to him. The township is silent. It's not actually speaking, but it is the source of his life in the way that a heart and the beating of the heart keeps life going. Okay, then I've got intercausal. You want me to do the characteristics of all the characters in Life of Pi. Can't do it, just too much. Then Sharon, you want My Children, My Africa. Somebody's asked something more specific. I'll come back to that. Then Abigail, you asked about some questions about short stories, but I also got Victor King, who sent the fur coat. So Abigail, I hope this helps you. Let's have a look at this past paper on the fur coat. Now, Victor, I don't have time to do all of these questions. Why does she bang the door? So go back to the story. She crashes out, she bangs the door, puts the children to bed as if she were throwing sacks of turf into a cellar. So say to yourself, she is clearly angry. So you need to go back to the story and find out, why is she so angry? Why is she so upset? But let's look at B. She put the children to bed as if she were throwing sacks of turf into a cellar. Identify the figure of speech, as if. It is a simile. Now, why is this appropriate? Now, I've got quite a few questions that say that students are battling with a question around what is the effectiveness of a figure of speech, or why is the figure of speech appropriate? So let's just talk very briefly about effectiveness. Let me come back to this page where we were discussing paradox. If something is effective, it does what it is meant to do. So if you are asked, is the image appropriate? It means, does it fit the context? Is it right for where it is used? If you're asked, is it effective? You're being asked, does it do what it is meant to do? Now, sometimes the examiner will tell you what they want you to focus on. So they'll say, is it effective in creating the mood? Or is it effective in showing the character? Or is it effective in affecting the audience or the reader? But there are times when the examiner does not tell you that. So your first step is, does the examiner tell you this? If so, these are your key words. If the examiner does not tell you, you have to provide that focus. And it's the same thing for, does it fit the context? Is it right? Is it effective in its context? So where was my first quote? Right. So you're putting your children into bed. That's what she's actually doing here. But she's doing it as if she were throwing sacks of turf. So what is turf? It is soil that the grass is growing in. So you cut it out, and the grass, the roots kind of hold it together. That's turf. Now, how would you throw a sack? So a big sack which has turf, it's got all this soil and grass, and if it's dried, you're going to use it maybe for a fire, into a cellar. How would you throw those sacks? Well, with some energy, but not much care. You know, you're not concerned. You've got a sack, and it's filled with the stuff, and you're kind of hurling it. You're sort of throwing it. Okay, so how is she putting her children to bed? It's actually quite a funny image, that she's kind of throwing the children into their bed. Just go away, and she gets rid of them. So come back to the question, explain why it's appropriate, link it back to the anger. Look, A, B, C. The question is being scaffolded for you. You're building from one thing to the other. So it's appropriate. You talk about the throwing and the not being very concerned and not taking much care. You're not kind of carefully putting these sacks. You are throwing them. You are hurling them. And relate it back to how upset she is. She just wants to get the children into bed. This is story. This is more or less story. Obviously, if you go back to line 14, she is talking about the fur coat. And she says, the last thing that I wanted anybody to start thinking is that I, by any possible chance, should be getting grand notions. She watches him hopefully. She wants him to say, it's okay to have the fur coat. It's not a sign that you're getting a grand notion, an idea too big for yourself. So she wants him to reassure her that her dream of having this coat is reasonable. It's not either unreasonable or unjust or unfair or silly or any of those things. Now, discuss the irony. So let's stop at irony because so many students battle with irony. So she says, I don't care what you or anybody else says, Paddy. There is something vulgar about a fur coat. I can't do the accent. Now, has Paddy said that it's vulgar? No, he hasn't. So she's putting words into his mouth. She is saying that either her husband or other people will say that if she buys and then wears this fur coat, she is behaving in a vulgar way. In other words, she would be showing off the money that they now have. I think what's really important is to remember that these people have been activists. So she has really suffered and she's been incredibly poor. She needed help from a fund that it was started for the wives of activists who were in prison. He was in prison. So the best way to think about the story is to relate it to our struggle and our activists who went to prison, whose families are left without any means of earning a living, and they are really, really struggling, and they're hungry, and they're in trouble. That's what it was like for her. Now think about a number of people after the election in South Africa where people had money. They suddenly are given money, are getting money they never had before. And we know that some of those people did show off. In our country, it was cars. For her, it is this fur coat. So think about the person who's had all this difficulty, the struggle, and now there is money. And you want to show people, look, I've struggled, but I've got kind of my reward. So for her, the fur coat is the reward she longs for. But she is aware that it would be vulgar. It would be showing off. It would be saying, now my husband, instead of being in prison, is a member of the government. And she's aware that spending that money on herself, it doesn't fit with people who were part of the struggle. Because now they should be more concerned about other people. They should be concerned about the money going to the poor. Does this sound relevant to you? Because I hope it does. And that's what is worrying her. So when she says here that other people are going to call her vulgar, she's aware that it would be vulgar. So where is the irony question here? What is the irony? So the first irony is she says other people are going to say this. Well, they haven't said it. In fact, she says, I don't care what you or anybody else says. She's implying it that people are saying it now. They're not. So the first irony is her husband hasn't called her vulgar. What is calling her vulgar? Her conscience. Her knowledge that she shouldn't be spending this kind of money on herself just because they're now part of the new government. All right, so that is, I think, the first and obvious irony there. It's only out of 2 marks. All right, then the use of the fur coat is story. That is story. Now, do you think her behavior is immature? How do you answer this? The first thing to do is to say, what behavior do you think is immature? So are you seeing it as her crying at the end of the story? Are you seeing it as her desire for the fur coat? Is that immature? How many people desire very, very expensive cars and not 1, 5? Is that immature? Now remember, I'm linking it to the South African context because I want you to see why this story is relevant. Why are we reading this story written about Ireland and not about South Africa and written about a while ago in Ireland? Because it's still relevant. But you can't use that in your answer. You have to locate it in the story. Is it immature of this woman who has struggled so much and been deprived of so much? Is it immature to want to show off a bit now that her husband is part of the government? And remember, for the 3 marks, you can say yes and get 3 marks. You can say no and get 3 marks, or you can go yes because of da-di-da-di-da and no because of da-di-da-di-da. This is very important. In FAL, it's out of 3 marks. In home language, it's out of 4. But it's the same kind of question. It's really, really important that you practice that question. Okay, so that's Abigail and Victor. And Tokozo, you want the poems for home language. Which poems, sweetie? Right, then have a crack at Cry the Beloved Country. All right, so I'm not quite sure what exactly I'm having a crack at. But all right, so the book is called Cry the Beloved Country, and the subtitle of the book is A Story of Comfort in Desolation. So your first step is to explain the meaning of desolation. It is emptiness. So if a land is desolate, then nothing grows there. If a person is desolate, they are hopeless and despairing. They have given up all hope. So start by saying, is there a physical land that is desolate? Yes. So start with the opening chapters, which are repeated later on. We are told that the village of Ndecheni is like down here. And up on the heights, we are told that there's a lot of grass, and we're told that the water flows in the kloofs and so on. And the cattle get nice and fat. But what do we know is that this is where whites are in control. And what have they done? They have pushed the black population into as small as possible an area of land. So there are too many people, too many cattle, and as a result there's hardly any grass, and the cattle get thin, and the children get sick, and the people migrate. Why? Because they're looking for jobs. So they want jobs, and so they leave. So what happens? So can I come back to my desolate? So the land is desolate. Why? Because of basically the Group Areas Act. And before the Group Areas Act, the attitudes of the colonial government, which deprives the majority of the population of access to the land and pushes these people onto a tiny bit of land. So where the whites are, there's wealth and riches, and where black people are, there is desolation. So the people become hopeless and despairing. Why? Because people start to die. The children die. And then because people migrate, the family is broken and cannot be repaired. The tribe is broken. The village is broken. So we move from the desolation of the land, which is part of a colonial, racist set of policies, to what happens to the life of black people, to their culture, their lives, their families, their rituals, everything. And it is hopeless and despairing. But Alan Paton says this is not a story of entire desolation. There is comfort. So go to the story itself. The biggest desolation is what happens to Absalom. Obviously, you've also got Gertrude and John, the breaking up of the family. But Absalom's being hanged is an ultimate desolation for his parents. But there is comfort. And the comfort comes because the white man realizes that he cannot blame Absalom entirely for the murder of his son. That this murder comes out of, if I could draw an arrow right up to all that desolation, it comes out of white, racist, colonial subjugation. And that realization is terribly important. And he realizes as well, he cannot fix the country, but he can try to make amends. When you make amends, you try to put something right that has been wrong. And he recognizes that the most terrible wrong has been done to the indigenous population of this country. And he tries to do what little he can. And if we extrapolate that out, he is one person doing what little he can. But Alan Paton's suggestion is that if we all try, then that little will be big. So the story of comfort is you mustn't say, oh, but I can't fix the problem in this country. I can't fix the water. I can't fix the poverty. I can't fix the litter. I can't fix the fact that sewage is pouring into the Vaal River. You might not be able to fix everything, but if you do what you can in your area, you stop at robots. You don't run over people on the streets. If you do what little you can, and if every single one of the 60 million of us did what little we could, there would be comfort in desolation. I don't know what else you'd like me to say. There's lots in the story. So you need to look at the terrible pain and suffering and hurt. And then people like Mrs. Letebe and look at the comfort in desolation. I hope that's helped.